Brazil's president says his country lacks the resources to fight a record number of wildfires burning in the Amazon rainforest. Right now, thousands of wildfires are decimating this vast region, often referred to as the lungs of the planet. Today, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres tweeted that he is deeply concerned by the fires, and French President Emmanuel Macron has said the fires should be a topic of discussion in the upcoming G7 meeting this weekend. So far this year, about 75,000 fires have been detected by Brazil's Space Research Center. That's an 85% increase from last year. More than half of those fires are in the Amazon region, spelling disaster for the local environment and ecology. The Amazon rainforest generates more than 20% of the world's oxygen and 10% of the world's known biodiversity. Joining me now from Sao Paulo, Brazil, is freelance journalist Sam Cowie. Sam, you arrived back from the Amazon just 2 nights ago on Tuesday night. What's the latest? What did you see? What can you tell us about these fires raging throughout the region?
Well, the Amazon is a huge, extensive place. It's bigger than the countries of the European Union put together. And what we know, although it's the dry season there right now, when this is traditional around this time that we see fires in the Amazon, this could be used for clearing land and after deforestation, or it could also be used for revitalizing soils for local small-time agricultural producers. It's a cheap but effective way of revitalizing soils before the rainy season begins around November, December, when people will plant crops and seeds for grass if they're raising cattle. What we know is these are huge fires that are happening right now. A plane was forced to divert on Friday or Saturday from the capital of Porto Velho because of forest fires raging in a national park there, the Floresta do Jamari. And so this is an extremely serious situation that we have there right now. Like I say, it's usual at this time of year to have fires, but there's been a huge increase since last year. And environmentalists are blaming that partially on the president, his rhetoric, and his policies or lack of in terms of caring for the environment, and especially in the Amazon region.
Okay, tell me more about that, because he has a different take.
Yeah, that's right. The president and his cohorts in the capital, Brasilia, tend to make out that the deforestation conversation is merely just a plot by Europeans to make out that to ensure that Brazilian products aren't competitive on a global scale. His chief of staff, Onyx Lorenzoni, today was saying exactly that the deforestation discussion is basically that. It's just to stop Brazilian products becoming competitive on a global scale. Mr. Bolsanaro himself the other day, just earlier this week, he said that he believed that it could in fact be international NGOs and national NGOs rather that had their funding cut recently that could be behind the fires in order to make him and his government look bad. Since then, he's kind of backtracked on that, and it actually turned out that he got that information more from online on social media, from a Facebook supporters group, something like this. And of course, these are rumors that spread like wildfire, for want of a better word, in the Amazon region. You know, fake news is a real big phenomena in Brazil too. But that's the president's stance on things, and he says he regrets the French president Macron's take on things and criticism, and says that Macron is in fact using this for personal political gain.
Yes, he said the Brazilian government remains, this is Bolsanaro saying, the Brazilian government remains open to dialogue based on objective data and mutual respect. The French president's suggestion that Amazonian issues be discussed at the G7 without the participation of the countries of the region evokes a misplaced colonialist mindset in the 21st century.
Well, I mean, the president talks about objective data, but, you know, just weeks ago, one of the world's most respected scientists in Amazon conservation, scientist Galvão, who was the president of the director, in fact, of the Brazilian National Space Institute. Wonderful, fantastic technology for monitoring Amazon deforestation. He had to leave the Space Institute because of constant arguments with Bolsanaro, because the Space Institute was presenting data consistently that that deforestation, was rising this year significantly. Mr. Bolsonaro, he says now that Brazil doesn't have the resources to tackle these fires. Yet in the past weeks, he's snubbed Germany, he's snubbed Norway, and these are two of the biggest investors in the Amazon Fund, and the Amazon Fund directly goes towards paying these courageous firefighters in the Amazon, that are part of the enforcement agencies that are on the ground now trying to tackle these fires. So, in the past weeks, he's had very incendiary and aggressive rhetoric towards, some of the main investors in the Amazon Fund, which is dedicated to projects essentially to combat deforestation and destruction in the region that we are seeing now on a mass scale.
All right. Freelance journalist Sam Cowie in Sao Paulo, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Andrew Miller is the advocacy director of Amazon Watch, a nonprofit organization that works to protect the rainforest and indigenous people in the region. Andrew joins me now from Washington. Andrew, according to Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, the fires have increased by 85% from the same time last year. How concerned are you about what's happening?
Well, we're, of course, tremendously concerned about what's happening, not just with the fires, but also with the data about increased deforestation. And Sam referenced that in his comments earlier. And also the tremendous pressure that indigenous peoples are feeling in terms of land grabbers, in terms of miners, illegal loggers, and others. What's happening in the Amazon is hugely concerning because the rainforest, as enormous as it is actually at risk of a tipping point, of going over sort of an ecological precipice. The Economist wrote about this the other week, after which the entire ecosystem will go into a dieback scenario. And the implications for that for global climate are enormous in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that would be created by that. Of course, the Amazon generates huge amounts of the world's fresh water, the oxygen, houses biodiversity. And of course, the impacts of these fires, of the deforestation, on local indigenous peoples is enormous. Those are the folks who are the frontline defenders, and they're the ones who are risking their lives daily in order to help protect the Amazon.
So what's your reaction when you hear the Brazilian leaders' reaction to what's happening, saying that this is started by NGOs, that in fact Brazil doesn't have the resources to get the firefighters out of control, that he's driving scientists away? What's your reaction to that?
Well, the reaction is simply that these are demonstrations of what the actual will of Jair Bolsanaro and his administration. Their will is to develop the Amazon. Their will is to cut down the forest, to open up lands for agribusiness, for mining, for other economic interests. Their will is not to protect the Amazon. The lack of resource question, Sam referenced the Amazon Fund being cut because of the actions of the Bolsonaro government. The Brazilian environmental minister cut fire prevention resources in May by $1.5 million. So it's all of these indicators that show that they're really not that interested ultimately, and they're trying to control the narrative. They have all these sort of excuses that Sam was referencing, blaming the Europeans, blaming NGOs, saying that the deforestation statistics are fake news, et cetera. They're trying to control the narrative, but it's very difficult to control the narrative when the smoke can be seen from space, when Brazilian cities are being clouded over at 3 in the afternoon. And this is unfortunately likely to get worse unless there's a serious change of heart on the part of the Brazilian government.
Yeah, which it doesn't look like there is going to be. It is going to be on the G7 this weekend, and they'll be talking about it. But let's talk more about if it's not protected, if these fires are allowed to go ahead, if the land clearing and land degradation continues to happen. Give me a clear example of what that will mean for the world?
Well, as I mentioned, with humanity facing global climate chaos, there are a whole series of ecological tipping points, the thawing of the tundra, the melting of the ice caps, and the destruction of the Amazon. This ecological precipice that I mentioned, we don't know where that is. There's been roughly 18% of the Amazon has been deforested over recent decades. We don't know if the tipping point is at 20% deforestation or 23%, or maybe we've already reached it, which is of course a nightmare scenario. We won't know until we've passed the tipping point. And so we have to work and do everything we can to try to avoid that from happening. And that's why we need to pressure the government, support Brazilian social movements. There are protests going on around Brazil all this weekend. Brazilian indigenous peoples have been mobilizing. 2 weeks ago, 2,000 indigenous women from around the country were mobilized and protesting in Brasilia. Indigenous peoples are fighting in their communities. They're putting together forest guards to go and actively confront the loggers and the miners. This is the work that has to be done right now to support social movements on the ground, indigenous peoples who are fighting to protect their territory, because if they fail, the implication is essentially contributing to global climate chaos.
And when you talk about the global climate chaos and you talk about the tipping point, what does the tipping point look like, Andrew?
Well, the tipping point looks like the images that we're seeing right now, but just happening all year round. The droughts, massive forest fires, and ultimately the Amazon would be turned into a savanna over the course of the next years, decades. And all of the carbon emissions that would be created and other greenhouse gases going up into the atmosphere and contributing to the 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees increase in climate change. And humanity simply cannot afford that. I mean, that's essentially, we're looking at extinction level scenarios for many species, potentially including humans. So we simply cannot allow this to happen.
Andrew Miller, the advocacy director of the nonprofit organization Amazon Watch. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much.